About 60 of them were under 17, but they've been taken to the police headquarters for their own safety. No charges have been made, but various substances found at the club are to be examined.
Oh, bless him. I have no idea what the substances were, but I remember that suit. Still, as they say, the trouble with the 60s is if you remember them, you weren't really there. But tonight we're going to meet some of the names who really were there, and we'll tell it as it was in swinging Britain, from music to sport, film, fashion and politics, and we'll be pulling back the covers on the so-called sexual revolution. But let us take a look behind those news headlines from the 1960s. Who on earth can forget that man landed on the moon? But what we didn't know at the time was that when Neil Armstrong took that historic Apollo 11 photograph, Buzz Aldrin was, in fact, relieving himself. So what you are looking at there is actually the first lunar leak. 1967 was the year of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album, but do you remember who knocked them off the #1 slot? It was, of course, Val Doonican Rocks, but gently. And if you can recall the great train robbery, then you'll be aware that the Postmaster General claimed it was all due to a precise knowledge of the train timetable. So, to foil any future attempts, British Airways decided to run the trains on a schedule that nobody could work out. So here we are today, and who better to lead our march back in time than one of the most influential figures of that decade?
Good evening and hello, pop pickers. I'm grateful to be asked here tonight as your Prime Minister on this very special occasion as we celebrate the remarkable decade that we are living in at the moment. And tonight, you know, I'd like to speak to you very frankly, very straightforwardly, with complete candor and sincerity. Still, you can't break the habits of a lifetime, so let me just say this. I remember something my old friend Jack Kennedy said to me recently when I was in Washington. Well, he said two things, actually. The first was that if he didn't have that girl in the green dress inside the next half hour, his trousers would explode. But the second thing was, he said, Harold, he always liked British Prime Ministers to be called Harold because he was sure of remembering their names. Harold, the 60s will be remembered as the decade when the world changed forever. And that's true. You know, it's particularly true of our own country. The 60s marks the end of the old Britain and the birth of a new. And we in government are playing our part by offering a dynamic new leadership, sweeping away the worn-out traditions of class and privilege, represented by a Tory party plagued by sleazy sex scandals, Vassal and Profumo, and by a nauseating social snobbery. I was talking about all this only yesterday with my old friend, Her Majesty the Queen. What a wonderful woman she is, so regal and gracious, such a flawless complexion. We get on terribly well together. She always looks forward to our Tuesday night audiences when I brief her on government policy. She says it's the only night of the week when she can relax and have a good laugh. And I pointed out to her that no Labour cabinet ministers ever got involved in sex scandals. And she said, when I look at you, Prime Minister, I'm not in the least bit surprised. A moving tribute from a noble lady. And you know, she gives her own leadership. She certainly promised me that at least in the matter of sex scandals, her own family would be leading the way in the future. I sometimes wonder, you know, what future historians will consider my own greatest achievement. After all, there's so much to choose from. I took Britain into Europe, but it was closed, so I took it out again. I united the Labour Party. I think it was for a Wednesday afternoon, but I'll have to check on that. But above all, I laid the foundation, despite some terrible setbacks, for the future greatness of this country. And nothing illustrates that better than two events which took place under my stewardship. On the one hand, we were forced to devalue the pound. On the other, we won the World Cup. And I can now confidently predict that in the future, as a result of my efforts, one of those two things will happen again, and the other certainly won't. And perhaps my greatest contribution has been to earn for our great movement, the Labour movement, the trust and confidence of the British people, to such an extent that no future Labour leader will ever have to look back and talk, as I do, about 13 years of Conservative rule. The British are daft, but they can't be that daft. Good night, and thank you. There will be 45 guineas, please.
Thank you very much for that, John. Now, Lady Castle, or Barbara Castle, as you were known then, of course, the 60s was the first time that politicians became targets of television satire, like That Was the Week That Was. What was the reaction at the time in the cabinet?
Well, we loved That Was the Week That Was because, of course, it was before our time. It was an attack on the last days of the Harold Macmillan and Alec Douglas Hume governments. One thing, though, I must say, was that no politician likes being laughed at savagely, I don't think. I think Harold loved John's personations of him because they weren't malicious. They were affectionate and astonishingly accurate in many details. But other attacks Harold did dislike. And I remember he used to get very worked up in cabinet about what he considered were the biases in the media, particularly television. And he was always saying, oh, the BBC's against us, or ITV's against us, or whatever. And we used to say, oh, come off it, Harold. On the whole, they get it fairly well balanced.
John, did Harold Wilson ever tell you personally what he thought about your sketches?
There was one time in the BBC when Hugh Green, who was then the Director General, had a letter from Wilson himself saying that he objected, that there was an objection to something which I'd said, I can't remember what it was, and that if he hadn't been Prime Minister, he would sue. And Hugh Green apparently wrote back, or told me he wrote back, and said that, said, dear Prime Minister, please don't feel that just because you're Prime Minister, you don't have to sue. Please go ahead and sue if you want to. But he didn't.
Well, of course, Private Eye started in the early 60s. Politicians gave them plenty of material to work with. One of the best-selling editions then about the Profumo scandal was handed to them on a plate. Now, Richard Ingrams, of course, was editor. Was everything fair game from the very start, Richard?
Well, I think the Tories got it, as Barbara Castle was saying, the Tories got it in the neck from the beginning of the satire boom, because they were the government and they had been in power for 13 years. And particularly Harold Macmillan. I think Peter Cook began the tradition of mocking Harold Macmillan, which that was the week carried on. I don't think the Labour Party started to be really savagely attacked in Private Eye until about 1967, when the devaluation of the pound took place. And Wilson had a very easy ride to begin with, because he was such a successful, promoted himself so successfully as this technocrat who was going to sweep away all the Tory cobwebs and the fuddy-duddies and the Macmillans and the Humes. And a lot of us, including myself, I think, were to some extent taken in by that. Later on, he began to emerge as a much more promising comic figure than ever Macmillan had been. He was the best, from Private Eye's point of view, he was much the best material that any Prime Minister of this country in that period has ever been, I think, from a purely jokey point of view.
Now, Lance Percival, now you, of course, you were one of the regulars on That Was the Week That Was. Do you think it's had a lasting effect?
Not in the sense of that they were talking earlier about governments, etc., because Alec Douglas Hume complained at one time that That Was the Week That Was partly responsible for him losing the election. But we came off the air at the end of December, and the election wasn't until April. Now, for instance, in modern-day times, Spitting Image had a go at John Major right up to the 1992 election. But John Major still won, which doesn't say much for Spitting Image, but you see what I mean. On the other hand, you find that lines of those days about political figures last just as well as today. For instance, there's a line going around which we used 30 years ago, that now that Neil Kinnock has not got his European job, he's writing a Welsh version of the Kama Sutra instead, having been in every position except number 10. We used a very similar line to that with Hugh Gate School many years before, but not exactly the same line, the same idea. Yep. So a good story works 30 years later just as well.
Certainly does. Now, Screaming Lord Such is here. My lord, you actually stood against Harold Wilson in 64 and 66.
Yes,
why did you think that the country needed you to do that?
Well, because at the time you couldn't vote until you was 21, which I thought was ridiculous. I met a lot of young people, a lot of rock and rollers that couldn't vote. They had loads of kids. They could fight for their country. So I stood for votes at 18, and also I stood, as you know, the BBC had the monopoly, so I stood for commercial radio and actually run my own radio station, Radio Such. And also for the 3 R's, reading, writing, and rock and roll!
Funny you should mention that, because in the 1960s, of course, the establishment through the BBC was keen not to lose control over the selection of music that we could listen to. Upstart broadcasters had to leave our shores to get a voice.
Piracy. That's what's happening here, with the connivance of almost every teenager in southeast England at any rate. We're bound for Radio Caroline, the pirate ship that for over a year has given pop music to something like 20 million listeners, as their advertising sales staff claim. There's just a 10-kilowatt transmitter pumping the music out, but millions of kids have learnt to say, "I love Caroline" on 199, and they lap it up from 6 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. The disc jockeys have got themselves fan clubs out of the job that the Postmaster General is trying to stop.
Tony Blackburn, you were that baby-faced pirate, corrupting the nation's youth.
Well, not at all, actually. We were trying to give the youngsters what they wanted to hear. And we were all youngsters in those days, and as Screaming Lord Sutch said, the BBC had the monopoly, and that had to be broken. I mean, we didn't really look upon ourselves as pirates. I mean, all we were doing, we were going out of the country, officially going to Holland, but we stopped off on the way. And we provided all the music, and I think if it hadn't been for the pirate radio ships, Radio Caroline and Radio London, I still think we'd probably have that BBC monopoly.
Now, Johnny Walker, you, of course, stayed on, and you actually did break the law. Why did you feel that you had to really rock the boat?
Well, I didn't like the hypocrisy of Harold Wilson. I mean, he used to get photographs taken with the Beatles and like to associate the Labour government as being pro-young people. And then they turn around and introduce a law that's going to put all the pirates off. And also, I didn't think the BBC would be very good at it. And I mean, Radio 1 in the beginning would feature Jimmy Young with the Northern Dance Orchestra singing Unchained Melody, which wasn't my idea of rock and roll radio. So if Caroline wanted to stay on after August the 14th, when the law came in, I wanted to be a part of it.
Fair enough. Well, the establishment was being attacked on all sides. On the 13th of November, 1965, the nation was shocked as the F word was used for the first time on television in the latest satire show, BBC Three. Now, Robert Robinson was in the chair. Robert, were you horrified?
Well, the audience was. I mean, in those, it's very difficult to remember. What a deep taboo that word had. You never heard it in public except by accident. Now, of course, it's obligatory. If you don't use it, you get arrested by the political incorrectness police. But when Tynan did it, I can remember the terrible intake of breath. As though everyone had had their darkest secret suddenly revealed. But the nicest thing was, a week later, I was looking in a shop in the King's Road, and I saw a reflection behind me, and it looked like a huge bear. And I turned round, and it was a very large old lady with a red face and a ginger fur coat, and she said, "Hello, Mr. Robinson. I'm Lady Normanbrook, the wife of the chairman of the BBC." And she spoke in a rather old-fashioned way, and she said, "Oh, Norman's not been at all well, you know, but they sent him a new wireless round, and it's got a much bigger picture, and it's cheered him up enormously." And then she said, "You know that word Mr. Tynan used?" And I said, "Well, I'm afraid I do." She said, "Well, it forms no part of my vocabulary." And I said, "Well, I should jolly well think not." But she said, "Ever since Mr. Tynan said it, I've been using it all the time."
I wonder what she used before. Now, George Melly, as a fellow critic of Tynan's, your response to all that was what?
Oh, it was like a marvellous glass of champagne. I was sitting watching the television, as I was a television critic at the time, so I would have been doing rather late at night, in Gloucester Crescent, with Dr. Jonathan Miller. Indeed, it was an area much satirized in Private Eye at that time. I was always represented as a figure who simply belched from time to time, but I did rather more. And suddenly, it seemed to me in a perfectly acceptable way, Tynan got fed up with this constant moving around the word and said, "Surely we're grown-up people and we can actually say it." And it was like a little shock of electricity. We sent him a telegram congratulating him, actually. I don't know if I'd do that now.
What did you say in the telegram?
Oh, congratulations.
Oh.
To that. Why would one say more? One wouldn't add an adjective necessarily, would one? Because it seemed to be like an act of courage, and it released the word. I think now it appears comparatively trivial that he used it, but at the time it seemed good to be able to use a word to describe something without having to go miles round the houses in order to each other, you see. Yes.
Thank you. Johnny Spade's character, Alf Garnett, of course, I mean, he created something of a sensation himself by using, you know, pretty ripe language. Did you sympathize as well with Kenneth Tynan?
Well, he told me, because we were fellow stutterers, I thought mine's a bit better than it used to be, and as a stutterer, you know that if you're going to, the sibilants are very difficult. And if you catch one coming, you have to say it before your stutter notices it. Otherwise, you're in real trouble. And apparently, he said that he was asked, would he like to see... I'm starting now. Would he like to see sex on the stage? And as he went to say sex, as a stutterer, your mind freezes. And you know there's no way that word's going to come out. And the F word is a crutch for stutterers. It really is. And that is why I believe it's so popular. That is why it's so popular.
Mm. Thank you. Nearly 30 years later, that word, as you've heard, is still a hot potato whenever it escapes onto the air. And for many people, it's never acceptable language at any time.
Large young people, we recognise that the period between 6 and 9:15 is a period for family viewing. Well, I think we're being palmed off. Because last Thursday evening, we sat as a family and we saw a programme that started at 6:35. And it was the dirtiest programme that I have seen for a very long time.
Mary Whitehouse, what were you referring to?
I haven't the faintest idea.
That comes as something of a disappointment, I must say.
Oh, well, there were so many at that time anyway.
Did you feel that Kenneth Tynan was opening the floodgates?
I don't know, not at that particular time. I mean, if you talk about opening the floodgates, you've got to refer to some of the films and plays that we've had recently on television. It's such an ugly word.
Well, there is another four-letter word that may well have shocked you at the time, and that would have been H-A-I-R. Now, here's a squeaky clean bit from that pioneering rock musical, Hair.
They see me in my toga made of blonde, brilliant scene, biblical hair. My hair like Jesus wore it, hallelujah, I adore it, hallelujah, Mary loved her son. Why don't my mother love me? Blow it, show it, love the time, blow it, show it, love the time,
But now the camera zooming in and out was fairly disgusting, but it was Hair that brought four-letter words and nudity to the West End stage for the first time. Poor Nicholas, how far did you go?
Well, I always try to go all the way, Michael, but in that show I didn't, because the thing you're referring to is the infamous nude scene at the end of Act One, and that was the moment where all of the cast stood up and took their clothes off. But I was the only one who didn't have to, because I was the guy in the middle singing the song, but for some reason no one remembers me or the song.
But Oliver Tobias, you did get them off, didn't you? I wonder what was the response of the audience, I mean, to the show, or all of it.
Well, first of all, the audience was establishment was beautiful. Glitz, brilliancy, it gleamed, dinner jackets. And after that, they turned into animals. They rushed the stage, took their clothes off and danced with us, which later became an established thing to drag the audience on stage, but they literally rushed the stage, and it was quite an incredible experience. To see the break from, we were dressed in rags with long hair, and the kind of richness and the glitz turning over and liberating. It was extraordinary, quite an extraordinary moment.
Well, yes, of course, Marcia Hunt, it was at the end of the 60s, this show, wasn't it? So, I mean, was it in fact really such a sort of a breaking down of barriers?
Well, it was 1968, and in fact, I think experimental theater had done a great deal more than it's given credit for. And what changed with Hair was that these plays where people were taking their clothes off and being explicit in their speech and whatnot, was taken to the commercial stage and made a lot of money and attracted audiences who were not interested in experimental theatre. I don't know whether it broke as much ground as people claimed. I think what was important was it opened the day after the Lord Chamberlain lost his powers to censor what went on in the West End.
Yes, that's significant, obviously.
I didn't take my clothes off very much, by the way. I have to say that we weren't paid to do that. So if you weren't feeling inclined on the night, you could just lie there and check out who had what.
There are no backstage romances, obviously. Well, hair and flower power were imported influences from across the Atlantic. Over there, they might have been turning on, tuning in, and dropping out. Here, we took things at a slower pace and switched on to the gentle, folksy sounds of our own love children. Ladies and gentlemen, Donovan.
In the chilly of uncertainty, I want to be in the warmth of your loving mind. For to feel you all around me and to take your hand along the sand. But I may as well try and catch the wind. When sundown hits the sky, I wanna hide a while behind your smile. And everywhere I'd look, your eyes I'd find. For me to love you now would be the sweetest thing. 'Twould make me sing. But I may as well try and catch the wind. When rain has hung the leaves with tears, I want you near for to kill my fears. But I may as well try and catch. But I may as well try and catch the wind.
Thank you very much. Still Plum, Swinging with Sandy Shaw, Sex with Rita Cassingham, and a bit of a knockabout with George Beck.
The trick is to know exactly what you want before you come in. The new spicy chicken wings meal for just $2.59. Yes, the new chicken wings meal. I'm going to walk straight up there and order the new quarter pounder with cheese deluxe meal. What? Where did that come from? Maybe I do want the new quarter pounder with cheese deluxe. I just didn't realise it.
Welcome to McDonald's. May I help you?
Oh, no.
I beg your pardon? Decisions, decisions. With so much on offer, what will you choose? McDonald's Winter Warmers. This month only.
Did you know you can get £180 off last-minute winter holidays at Lumpolly? Get away. Really?
In almost everyone's life, there have been some unforgettable journeys. Introducing the new Rover 400. With engines up to 2 litres and all the room, refinement and luxury you expect in a Rover. The new Rover 400 will not only take you where you're going, it will make the journey something to remember.
Driving to the continent? Sail through the traffic. Sail North Sea ferries from Hull. For a brochure, call 0482 70 770.
For flu strength symptoms, take Lemsip Flu Strength. Lemsip Flu Strength, new for flu. Because you love him, give him Caesar. Choice cuts of fine meats carefully selected and prepared with the vitamins and minerals he needs every day. Caesar, to love him like he loves you.
It's coming your way, the £500,000 Gold Card. Start playing and winning tomorrow. Get your Gold Card free with the Sunday Mirror tomorrow.
Why buy these two when you can buy new Ultra Bold Liquid all-in-one and save money? And our refill saves you even more.
In Liverpool, there are now more than 300 groups. Not many of them will realize all their ambitions. But here's one group that has broken through the show business barrier, soaring into the hit parade, the Swinging Blue Jeans.
Woo! 30 years later, they're still together, the Swinging Blue Jeans. What do you think of that, Janice Nichols?
I'll give it 5.
Norman Vaughan.
It was definitely swinging.
Stanley Unwin.
Well, rather special load and took me down when I jumped up a low down. But all the trend of the music joyful and deep joy to all of it.
I think they liked it. Thank you, fellas, very much. Now, whatever you think about the 60s now, there was a definite feel-good factor about being British then. Pop groups were taking over the world, and we seemed to be setting all the fashion trends. Not only that, we were making it in sport. The ladies did us proud at Wimbledon. Ann Jones beat Billie Jean King for the title in '69, and in '61, Angela Mortimer and Christine Truman gave us a thrilling all-British final, with Angela taking the title 4-6, 6-4, 7-5. And in 1966, England won the World Cup 4-2 after extra time. Warm glows all round. Now, Kenneth Wolstenholme was, of course, the commentator for that match. Kenneth, there was just a touch of controversy, wasn't there?
Oh, only in Germany. I mean, after all, that that third goal, I mean, it was a goal because it was a goal for England against Germany, and the referee, who could speak English, Italian, French, and German, conversed with the linesman, who was a Russian, who could speak Russian and Turkish, decided it was a goal, and Roger Hunt tells me the ball hit the crossbar, swerved well over the line. That's why he didn't belt it into the back of the net. So I don't think there's any controversy at all, Michael.
No, fair enough. I'll tell you what, let us remind ourselves of that shot, the one that clinched the World Cup, along with two other memorable 60s sporting triumphs. Lynn Davis in the Tokyo Olympics and Henry Cooper versus Cassius Clay in 1963.
And here comes Hurst. He's got some people are on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now. It's 4.
The bell has sounded, and he's up at about 3, Clay. That was the end of the 4th round, and he hit him about 2 seconds before the end of the round with a left hook. Clay took one chance too many, and he still doesn't know where he is.
Well, Henry Cooper, it is true, you was robbed.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Mike. I suppose I hit him too late in the round, or we had the two patriotic Englishmen when I rung the blooming bell.
But there was a bit more to it than that. Come on, be honest.
No, but they did doctor the glove. I mean, actually, I saw Angelo Dundee last night, and we were having a chat about that, and he said his fella, definitely didn't trip, and he said that he was so in such a bad way, he had to just get time for him to recover. So he just noticed on one of the gloves that the stitching was being stretched, so he just stuck the scissors and ripped it and called the referee over. Referee had to go to steward in charge. Steward in charge had to send someone back to Chief Whip in the dressing room to get another pair of gloves. And by the time they got back here to Chief, what he said had to get Ali like a 2.5 minute interval so he could recover. And unfortunately, he came out there and hit me on the eye, which was so badly cut then, you know, the referee had to stop it, yeah.
So you accepted what Dundee said and just gave him a left hook. Makes sense. Now, Lynn Davis, you looked pleasantly surprised when you won the long jump there, but the 64 Olympics were something of a revelation. And, of course, you became a name overnight, didn't you?
Well, as a result of that, I came back and had a wonderful welcome in the valleys. As you can imagine, we don't win that many medals, but when I came home, the streets they'd given the children a day off from school, and there were flags and buntings out all over the place, and I assumed then I'd become a household name and that everybody in the country knew who I was, but that wasn't the case, because in November of that year, I was invited to the Daily Express Sports Personality of the Year luncheon in the Savoy Hotel. And about 500 guests were there, and I couldn't come along because I had a very bad bout of influenza. And the chairman of the Daily Express got up, and I think the winner was Jim Clark, the Scottish racing driver who was killed in 1966, and he won it, and the chairman said Jim Clark. And in second place, that great Welsh long jumper, Olympic gold this year in Tokyo, Lynn Davis. Unfortunately, she can't be with us today.
Funny thing, of all the sports, though, it was football in the 60s that suddenly seemed to acquire glamour. And if you had to name the top box office draws in the British game, not many people would disagree with the lineup we have here tonight. Gordon Banks, Peter Osgood, Dennis Law, Rodney Marsh, and for your delight once more, the magic of George Best.
Styles trying to work a position. Best gets it there.
Rodney Marsh, we know, of course, that you and George are mates, but to assess him professionally, where does he stand in the history of the game?
Well, I think there was a period there, Michael, for about 2 years, around 66, 67, and maybe even 68 and 69, where George Best was the greatest player in the world. Just a magnificent talent and a great showman.
George, what was it like being the very first sporting superstar?
It was terrific. It was lovely. I mean, I know everyone, all the people here, we talk about the swinging 60s, and it really was, particularly in sport. I mean, apart from the World Cup, which is tremendous from the English point of view, Celtic won the European Cup in 67. We won it in 68. But it was great. You know, you've mentioned the lads that are here, and every team in those days had 3 or 4 great personalities and great stars who went out to entertain, and it's changed a little bit, unfortunately, but the 60s really was a little bit special from a sporting point of view.
Now, Peter Osgood, of course, you were with Chelsea Football Club, which was right at the end of the King's Road, so there you are in the trendy headquarters, really.
Yeah, it was a super time, an exciting time for English football, as you say. They got to the World Cup and different things. Also, Chelsea got to 5 finals from 65 to 72 out of 8 years, which was a tremendous time for us. And also, in them days, it was if you were playing Manchester United, unfortunately, the opposing side, George Best used to turn up.
Now, before the decade was over, football and pop music had become synonymous with the swinging scene. And to hear more about what Sandy Shaw got up to with Andy Warhol, join us after the break.
I hope our home-fried chili sauce will be a success, Fred.
Don't worry, Trevor. It's a very good recipe. Let's see what the Johnsons think.
What's for dinner? It's a surprise. Chili con carne in 30 minutes. Brilliant. Fred, you've done it again.
Fantastic. Home-fried sauces in jars. Marvellous meals in minutes.
Can we please just get on with it?
Sorry I couldn't get to you any earlier. Horatio had an awful nose down in cows.
Oh, Beecham's.
Now what you could do with is some Beecham's Powder's capsules. Specially formulated for this situation. They help clear your nose, get rid of your headache, and make you feel better fast. Next!
Whenever you're cold, you feel better with Beecham's around. I want to be a musician. You want to be earning your keep, my son. I want to be quitting my first album. I want to be back in a minute, Wembley.
You'll probably work your way through more than one job before you can be what you want to be. That's why new prudential pension plans are designed to change from job to job with you.
Do you know I want to be Bobby's girl?
Oh, no.
Whatever you turn out to be, you'll want the flexibility of a new prudential pension.
I want to be in the office at 8 on the dot.
Smokey has his favourites. His toys. His playmate. Me, and his favourite Whiskers varieties. Now there's even more from Whiskers. New select cuts. Individual meaty pieces. Succulent, juicy, and delicious. Another of Smokey's favourites. New Whiskers select cuts.
It's coming your way. The £500,000 Gold Card. Start playing and winning tomorrow. Get your Gold Card free with the Sunday Mirror tomorrow.
This summer, Enterprise have slashed the prices of tens of thousands of holidays, with children either going free or from as little as £49. Enterprise will make your money go further.
London is all shook up by a rock and roll fashion show of the latest Carnaby Street gear. The clothes are with it, and the buyers don't want to be left without it. The race is on, and the mini skirt will now have to move over for the mini cute. Great Scott.
Now, everyone, of course, has their own image of swinging London, but in reality, it was just a few who were lucky enough to be there. And here's one who was, Sandy Shaw.
Everyone wanted to be with it in the 60s, but you had to be quick to keep up with the trends. When Time magazine put Swinging London on its front cover, Carnaby Street was already old hat, because for the first time, the people deciding what was in or out were the young generation, not our parents. Being a teenager in the 60s gave you a real sense of power. We were the biggest young generation of the century, nearly 1/3 of the population, and with that amount of youthful energy around, things were bound to happen. We believed that we could achieve anything. I can remember being 15, sitting in my maths class in Dagenham, daydreaming, not listening or caring what was going on or what my teacher was saying. I suddenly knew I had to get out there and do something. I mean, things were happening out there, and we all wanted to be part of it. My teacher was on a different wavelength. He might as well have been locked up in a time warp, like TV's Adamant.
Who are you?
Georgina Jones. You can call me Georgie.
Miss Jones, it's masculine attire. Is it part of the madness outside? Some protective disguise, perhaps?
Hey, watch it. This gear cost me a bundle.
This gear cost me a bundle. That is some kind of code. Strange. The fires of hell could be no stranger.
He obviously hadn't been watching Ready, Steady, Go, or he'd have known what being a teenager was all about. As a generation, we created our own exclusive scene. We had our own music, our own clubs, different hairstyles and clothes that set us aside from everyone else, because to be included in the swinging scene, you had to look the part. And nothing was designed to last, except moi. The whole thing about fashion then was that it was all so disposable and fast-moving. Dresses cost a fiver and were made of trash. You wore them once and you threw them away as something more fashionable took their place. And they even asked me to design shoes.
The feet that launched 1,000 discs are barefoot no more. A shoe collection launched by Sandy Shaw, and pretty psychedelic it was. Flashing lights and twisting torsos transformed this Chelsea restaurant into a bizarre bazaar. And Sandy herself, with designs on the vast footwear market, though she's walked her road to success with no shoes at all.
Dig the wig. One of the wildest parties I went to was an Andy Warhol experience where anyone who was anyone was hanging out. Jeff Banks and I were invited to Andy's studio to contribute to his latest work of art by piddling on his painting. Now, there was no way I could bring myself to do it, but as I was there with Jeff, I asked him to do the honours for me. After all, he had a far greater choice of angles, whereas my only option was to squat. We contemplated dropping water onto it, but it crossed our minds, yeah, well, he wanted the real thing. Then I suggested to Jeff that we got a cat to do the deed, but we thought the smell might give us away. And then, I got completely paranoid because I thought Andy might be filming the whole affair. Well, that was all part of being a pop star in the 60s. You were encouraged to do the most ridiculous things. But the freedom we found had its price, because growing up in public wasn't easy. I was expected to be eloquent and sophisticated on adult chat shows when I was barely out of my school uniform. Stars nowadays are protected by hordes of bodyguards, and there's an entourage of managers, business advisors and PRs guiding them through the money and media maze. Then you had nothing, not even an answer phone for protection. I could only ever leave my house by the back window, and with crowds and cameras constantly peering in, I got used to crawling around on my hands and knees inside the house to avoid their gaze. Full of young idealism, I thought I was changing the world, but in reality, I was a product, an export. Our innocence was exploited. If you saw a 60s recording contract now, you wouldn't laugh, you'd cry. Don't get me wrong, I loved being a part of it and wouldn't trade my experiences for the world. But making all those youthful mistakes while the press recorded every embarrassing moment was painful. And that's probably why so many of my contemporaries find it easier to draw a discreet veil over what they got up to in the 60s.
Thank you, Sandy. Now, George Best, you were known as the fifth Beatle, weren't you? Did you find the pressure too much to bear?
I think it became a little bit difficult, yeah, because the problem was, as long as they were talking about football, it was okay, but once they started prying into your private life, it was a little bit more difficult. And it was like living in a goldfish bowl. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I've got a lot of friends from those days who, unfortunately, have passed away, and some of them through their own hands because of the pressure. I mean, I'm supposed to be the nutcase. A lot of them, they told me I wouldn't make 25, then it was 35 and 45. And those were my doctors speaking. They're all dead now. And yeah, the pressure was immense, I think, if you ask anybody. But I wouldn't change it for anything. I happen to believe I lived through a decade that was one of the most exciting that it was possible to live in. I wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah. By the way, Sandy, what happened to that Andy Warhol painting in the end?
I think he was taking the piss, Michael.
Well, fame, of course, in those days was instant. Now, Reg Presley, lead singer with the Trogs. Now, you were still working on a building site when the Wild Thing was actually released, weren't you?
That's right. I was working on a building site near my hometown, and I was doing a gable end and building it, and there was another scaffold behind me, which a painter was finishing another pair of houses. And all of a sudden, he had this little transistor radio, and all of a sudden, Wild Thing came on, and he shouted across to me, not knowing who I was. Have you heard this record? He said, if it's not #1 next week, I'll eat my brush. And when it finished, the DJ said, straight in at number 11 this week. And I was so surprised. I threw my trowel down and there was a tea break just about to happen. I climbed down the ladder, I said, share out my tools, I'm off.
Now, Jane Birkin had the record Je t'aime and the film Blow Up to her credit, so she had all the right qualifications to be one of the beautiful people. But Jane, did you actually feel part of it?
I don't think so. In France, I sang Je t'aime moi non plus with Serge, only because I didn't want him to sing it with some sumptuous person, because he was going to sing it with some beautiful girl. So he asked me whether I could sing very high, and I said, yes, yes, yes. And so I sang a prelude to Chopin on one side, and then Je t'aime moi non plus on the other. And then suddenly it was sort of banned. I mean, the Pope banned it. And then when the Pope banned it, he gave us an awful plug, really, for publicity, because then it goes around the world that the Pope's banned it, and then everyone knows it's been banned, and then the BBC banned it. And then you're a little bit worried that people will hear about it, that you've gone and been banned.
Now, a lot of people made money out of pop, and Neil Innes, now you were parodying the pop groups at the time and doing very well, and touring all the time as well with the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. So was the swinging scene not just in London?
Oh, no, it was all over the country, but as you say, I mean, a lot of people made a lot of money out of pop, and I didn't. I mean, I suffered for my music, and now it's your turn. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to be, you know, not so long ago, and it's been very lucky for me. Thank you. I'm the urban spaceman, baby. I got speed. I've got everything I need. I'm the urban spaceman, baby. Here comes the twist. I don't exist.
And he charted with that as well. Back in a mo for a quick sexual revolution. Thank you.
When you book at Thomas Cook, their summer '93 giveaway means you could go free.
Free?
Why's that like your tennis racket?
I don't know. Why?
Because there are no strings attached.
Boom, boom.
Book with Thomas Cook and you could go free. So don't just book it. Thomas Cook it.
He's the most hated man on Coronation Street. First his wife left him for another man, now he's stolen Terry Duckworth's wife and son. Who is the real Des Barnes? Find out this Sunday in the News and Echo when he reveals all. The life, the loves, the laughs, and his biggest secret. Read his own incredible story exclusively in the 40p News and Echo. We expose the saucy secrets of the Swapping Club and a voucher for a free packet of seeds with every copy sold.
You can read Kevin Keegan and me in the News and Echo. It's a great Sunday paper, only 40p.
The Corgi originally was a cattle dog. We've actually bred 7 champions. And I think feeding's probably the key to everything. They've always enjoyed pedigree chum. The dogs have always loved it, but one of them found it too rich. We tried the improved recipe and his tummy was much better. It's definitely more digestible. He actually wolfs it down. He's put on body and coat and condition, and he's a happier dog. I would certainly recommend new improved recipe pedigree chum. I think it's the best.
The ancestral trail.
When he who is the chosen one shall tread upon the ancient path and battle there to overcome
The forces of the dark. The ancestral trail, an epic story of myths, magic, and monsters. In each part, follow the trail to strange new lands and meet terrifying beasts. Use your monster cards and ancient map to solve the ultimate quest, victory over the forces of the dark. The ancestral trail.
Welcome to a city in the heart of the country, where the only jams are on the table and the views stretch from the north of Scotland to the southwest of England. Welcome to a city where business people work at their leisure and families work at their pleasure. Welcome to a city where you're never far from the sea or seldom far from a public telephone. Welcome to a city where every year millions of visitors are greeted with a friendly punch by gentlemen who still wear hats. Welcome to Intercity.
funny, there was supposed to be a sexual revolution going on, but all through the 60s, most of us were still chortling away with the Carry On team. Now, Gerald Thomas directed them all. What is your theory, Gerald, that they were so popular at that time?
I don't really know, Michael, but I'm very grateful for it. But I think we took over from vaudeville. We had a wonderful team of artists. We gave the audience of that time exactly what they wanted. Because of the permissiveness, we were able to get away with certain things we couldn't have got away with the decade before. And I think we just set out to make happy movies. They had no messages, either social or political. They were just there to entertain. And I think they did that very successfully.
No doubt of that. Perhaps we'd all been reading too much Lady Chatterley in tabloid papers, but in any trendy 60s movie, getting down to it does tend to be the main theme. Rita Tushingham starred in A Taste of Honey and The Knack, and she is here to tell us all we need to know about sex in the 60s.
When I was a young girl growing up in Liverpool, there was always the threat of going too far. Girls were grouped into those who'd done it and those who hadn't. But for those who wanted to, but were worried about the consequences, something was about to come along that would change everything. The pill. In those heady days, it seemed to solve all our problems. For a pill that you took once a day, you could do it with who you wanted, when you wanted, and as many times as you wanted. Something that men had been able to do for a long, long time. Suddenly, women appeared to have the upper hand.
Why, what's he got that I haven't, apart from long hair? Well, come on, let's have it. What's he bleeding got?
He's younger than you are. You got it?
Philip Larkin told us that sexual intercourse began in 1963. And after that, women weren't afraid to show themselves off. We all loved the sexy dressing and makeup and the time we'd spend getting ready to go out on a date. We'd put on those layers of false eyelashes and a sort of peel-off eyeliner. You painted it on and it went on like cellophane. And then a bit later you'd be twisting away and the whole thing would drop off in your hand and you'd end up with one eye on and one eye off. And your dad would say, "Get that muck off your face, my girl." At the time, it felt like sex was everywhere. And people woke up to the fact that sex could sell anything.
It's chocolatey coating around golden vanilla ice cream. But when it does, our snack is Wall's Ice Cream Choc Bar.
I've got news for you. Inside this nice little square packet is the most marvellous new soft cheese. Philadelphia brand, it's called. Although I call it Philly for short. Oh, it's lovely. It's all sort of smooth and soft and subtle tasting and... I've gone right off.
You couldn't even escape the onslaught of sex at work. Sharp-eyed bosses realized that the best way of grabbing the attention of their workforce was to give them the company message with no holds barred.
She needs support. So do you. So set them right. Right interval, right angle. Set them square. Set them straight. Keep the roof supported, and you'll keep safe.
So that's how the National Coal Board spent its training budget in the 60s. And then, when you got home, even the BBC, guardian of the nation's morals, threw off its inhibitions and let rip. Take a look at these titles of a drama series of the time. was a rhyme at the time that went, David Bailey makes love daily. And I thought, gosh, and he still has time to take all those photos? Did men think they had arrived in libido heaven, or were they just as confused as the rest of us? Okay, so the pill had given us the freedom to say yes. But what had happened to the freedom to say no? I can remember going home to my bedsit late at night and thinking, everybody must be at it but me. God. The 60s, it was such a confusing time.
What is it? What do you want with me? What you trying on, eh? What you trying to do? Smarty, smarty, Mr. You smart, Mr. Smarty. You think you're all right. You think you're pretty clever. You do, don't you, Mr. Smarty? Tight trousers, Mr. Tight trousers, Mr. Narrow slacks. You think you're the kid, the cats. I'll show you, Mr. Tight trousers. Just you don't better come near me, dear. Just you don't better come near me. Well, just you, well, come near me. Well, Mr. Tight slacks, Mr. Come near me. Come near me. Come near me. Come near me. Come.
Well, let's take three girls for another opinion. Lisa Goddard, Susan Jameson, Angela Down. Now, when you were making that television series, was it a good time to be a young woman?
Yes, very good time. Yes, wonderful. Wonderful. And we were actually the first series that the lead parts were taken by girls, so that was quite a breakthrough. There still aren't enough now.
Angela, what do you have to say about that?
It was, not only was it the first series for three girls having the leading roles, but it was also about girls having a flat on their own in London. And nothing like that had been done before either. And it was just a sort of reflection of what had gone on in the previous...
And from three different backgrounds as well, and showing,
Yes, it was a single mother and a working class, girl. That was me, and then the sort of upper class girl.
Plump. I was very plump. Angela was very thin. Yes, she was just right. I was just
She was in the middle. So it was, I think it was a sort of representation of the girls in the 60s, really.
Very influential as well. I remember seeing Annie Lennox being interviewed. She said the only reason she came to London was because she saw Take Three Girls and realised that you can come to London and share a flat. Didn't you know that, eh?
No, I didn't know that.
That's why I came.
Thank you, Michael.
And George Best, of course, is a matter of historical record that you were pursued by many women, and here is some filmed evidence.
Always the best for Georgie. 4. Men's grooming aids. Cream cleanser, aftershave, hairspray, talc, the lot. 4 brings out the best in a man.
So, George, that was, of course, a television commercial, but was it a fair picture of your life at the time?
No, they got the name wrong. They called it 4. But, yeah, I mean, I'm not complaining. Yes, I suppose I was in a lovely position. We mentioned before, but if you pardon the expression, it was a time the long hair was coming in, the Beatles, the music, the football was terrific. I was a young man making plenty of money, so I was in a nice position, and that's where I got the reputation of going missing. Really, I was Miss United Kingdom, Miss England, Miss World.
Dennis Law, is that the way you saw George's life as well?
Yes, and of course, none of the rest of the players were envious at all of George in the way that because my good lady sat next to me, by the way. No, it was a different time. It was a lovely time, wasn't it? I mean, everybody is... I think it was an enjoyable time, not only for the football, but for life, wasn't it? I mean, as we've all known, I mean, times have changed, but I mean, it's not safe to go out nowadays. In the 60s, we used to sort of stagger through Manchester after a game, after a couple of shandies or whatever, and felt quite safe. So, no, it was a nice time.
Mary Whitehouse, as I recall, you were never actually against sex itself, were you?
How do you know that?
Well, as you never said you were.
Of course I'm not against sex.
You never said it to me.
No, of course not. it was because we were for sex, but against the exploitation of sex, which lay at the bottom and still lies at the bottom of so much of what we do. And, you know, it was mostly the BBC, with its powerful drama, its Wednesday plays, its late-night satires, and all of its, so often with its programs that dealt with issues like this. They were not balanced audiences or people speaking.
Well, you mentioned the drama, of course, and one of the most respected and respectable TV dramas of the time was the Forsyte Saga. Religious services were even rescheduled for it so that churchgoers wouldn't miss it. But no one was prepared for this.
I don't like that blouse. It's a shapeless thing.
Don't touch me.
Where have you been? Tell me at once, where have you been?
In heaven. Out of this house.
Don't. Kill me if you like, but don't. I'd rather you killed me.
Wash. No, there's no need to kill you. Anybody can help you, can't they? Can't! Can't! Well, I can't too. You're my wife. You're my wife. No. You're my wife.
Well, the nation fell silent at that. And Irene Dawn Porter played the brutalized Irene. What was the reaction so far as you knew?
Well, I think I needed more than a bottle of aspirin and lie down after doing that. But the extraordinary thing was that I got home from work one evening at about 5:30, turned on the television to see the news, I thought, and instead I saw two very respectable photographs of myself and of Eric Porter blown up, and in front of them were two teams of equally respectable people discussing at great length and vociferously the rights and wrongs of whether Soames should have indeed raped his wife. I think you haven't... It's pretty tame, you know, by basic instincts standards and the standards of today and even EastEnders, but the idea behind it is still shocking, I think. The idea that under the protection of marriage, women can be abused in that way. And that was what really shocked people, I think. I personally am very grateful that I got the part. And I think it was a very exciting era to belong to, and I'm very grateful that I was part of it.
Oliver Tobias, do you think it was a confusing time for men?
I think it was very innocent and fine. But it's just what people do. What do people do with freedom? What they do with liberation? I don't think it was the youth or the people doing it. It was the commercial exploitation of it. And I think that's the same. It's now as it was then. I think the young people suffer in this kind of business or in the media for the same reasons they did then. I think it's great to be freer and to have more rights than beef, you know. But it's confusing. I think it's very, very confusing for young people at the moment. It's worse. You know.
Marcia Hunt, how do you look back on those days?
With fineness and an eagerness to move on to the 90s.
Well, indeed, maybe talking about the 60s too much is the trouble with the 60s. But before our lips are sealed on the subject, I wonder if anything we've discussed tonight has changed anyone's view. Johnny Walker, what's your view on this?
It's interesting to feel a sort of collective guilt, in a way, at the freedom that many of us enjoyed in the 60s. And I mean, there is AIDS now, which is a very heavy thing for young people to have to deal with, that wasn't there then. But I think one part of the mistake we've made is not so much blaming of saying the 60s were responsible for some of the troubles we've got now. I think a lot of us became straight again, really. We sort of got... The establishment pressure was so strong against the 60s. I mean, they did things like putting Elvis in the army was to disarm the appeal that he had. Constantly hounding the Rolling Stones. You know, the establishment wanted to strike back and get back control, getting rid of pirate radio. And it's quite interesting how some of the people who were very free and very outspoken in the 1960s, when they became parents, suddenly they became just as conventional as their parents had been. So I think we sort of put our toes in the water and got a bit scared about it, actually.
George Melly, any change of attitude on your part?
I think what we missed out completely, I mean, we've gone on about sex and so on. we've missed out that people actually thought they could change things. I think that was the wonderful thing about the 60s. Now, everybody sits there shrugging cynically. But then, although there was a great deal of stupidity, there was that awful contraction of language so you could speak English if you could say heavy, wow, and far out. That was enough to get everything through. At the same time, people actually thought we, young people, are going to change things. That's what I regret in that passing.
Well, whatever else, I think we can agree it was a golden era for pop music. Now, Alan Freeman, obviously there is so much music to choose from, but I know there is one sound that you would choose to represent the best of that decade.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Michael. The swinging 60s, we had great fun. There was a tremendous amount of music, and about of all the records that came along in the 60s, there's one that I have very fond memories of, and it's this one. Greetings, pop pickers. The year is 1966. They might get to #1, all right. It's the Trogs, and it's called Wild Thing. Not off.
Wild thing, you make my heart sing. You make everything green. Wild thing, wild thing, I think I love you. But I wanna know for sure. So come on. Hold me tight. You move me. Wild thing. You make my heart sing. You make everything grooving. Wild thing. Come on, wild thing. Shake it, wild thing.
Not off.
She's just a girl. I've got butterflies on my stomach. She's in no way to be treated differently.
I'm sure they're all very nice girls.
Welcome to the academy, Sue.
I'm having a birthday party.
Invite them all to your mother's party.
How can they imagine an embassy full of aristocrats is going to be more fun than a night here dancing?
Your insolence gets you nowhere. Tell them how much this means to you.
A taste of the 50s in Head Over Heels, Monday at 9 on ITV.
Thinking of going to the cinema?
Hello, I'm Laurie.
Oh, hi, Gramps. Dad, they won.
blouse he was.
My dears, here's the frightfully natty Tipo Eleganza, a snip at under £8,000 sterling. The delicious Tempra Eleganza, yours for under 10,000. Elegance is the game, Eleganza is the name. Thank you so very much.
Norwich Union Healthcare offer you a commitment that, unlike some other healthcare schemes, can take care of you all the way through hospital. Call Healthcare Free on 0800 424242. Norwich Union. We'll keep you in the best of healthcare.
Toothpaste, razors.
Bread, milk, coffee, Coke, tea bag.
Tea bags, 4 chips, 2 sandwiches, 2 pasties.
Shampoo, toothpaste, deodorant.
Newspaper. Dog food. Dog food. Crackers.
Cat food.
4 chips.
Cake.
2 sandwiches.
Steak. Cherry slice.
Oh, cherry slices. 2 pasties. Newspapers.
Esso has more forecourt shops than anyone else, where you can fill up with whatever you need, whenever you need it.
And,
All you have to do is remember what you wanted.
You remember the crackers?
The BT Euro Special. In January, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., a 4-minute call to any EC country is reduced to 99p.
Just one match to go. Super Bowl 27. The champions of the NFC, the Dallas Cowboys, take on the champions of the AFC, the Buffalo Bills. Starring Michael Jackson in the halftime show. From Pasadena, California, Super Bowl 27. Next Sunday at 10:35, live on 4.
These men and women are on the toughest adventure training course in Britain.
Stick your tongue in. What do you think I'm playing here?
They're not in the army, they're business managers learning about team spirit.
All I want to do now is just get off this hill as quickly as I can.
Eric, everything in this team you've done brilliantly. Don't let us down here. This is pathetic!
Cutting Edge, tomorrow at 9 on 4.
You're watching Channel 4 and alien director James Cameron's underwater science fiction thriller, The Abyss.